Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes. Today we're diving into one of the most influential and, let's be honest, challenging works of philosophy, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit.
Yeah, it's definitely not light reading. But trust me, the insights are worth the effort. It's a book that can fundamentally change how you see the world, yourself, and the whole process of understanding.
So before we embark on this intellectual adventure, can you give us a quick overview? What's the big picture of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit?
In a nutshell, it's the journey of consciousness itself. Imagine tracing the evolution of how humans understand the world, from our most basic sensory awareness to the highest form of knowledge. Hegel meticulously lays out this journey in stages, and each stage builds upon the one before it.
Okay, so we're talking about a grand narrative of human understanding. What are some of the major themes or ideas that we'll encounter along the way?
Well, one of the central themes is the idea of the dialectic. This is Hegel's method where opposing ideas clash and synthesize, leading to new and more comprehensive understandings. It's like a constant process of intellectual push and pull.
So it's not about finding one right answer,
Yeah.
but about this constant back and forth between different perspectives.
Exactly. And this dialectic plays out in all sorts of ways throughout the book. For example, there's the famous master-slave dialectic, which explores the complex relationship between power and self-consciousness.
Ooh, that sounds juicy. We'll definitely have to unpack that one.
Mhm.
What else should we be on the lookout for?
Well, keep in mind that Hegel is trying to understand the totality of human experience. So we'll encounter themes of self-consciousness, the relationship between the individual and society, the role of history, the limits of reason, the nature of religion, and ultimately the quest for absolute knowing.
Absolute knowing. That sounds pretty intense.
It is. But it's not some mystical state. It's more about understanding how understanding itself works. It's about recognizing the limitations of our own perspective and the ongoing process of how knowledge evolves.
Yeah, okay, I'm starting to get the picture. So we're going to follow this journey of consciousness through Hegel's eyes.
Mm.
Where do we begin?
We begin with consciousness, the very first chapter of the Phenomenology. And within consciousness, Hegel starts with the most basic form of awareness, sense certainty.
Sense certainty. It sounds pretty straightforward. Isn't that just about what we experience through our senses?
It seems that way, right. But Hegel, being Hegel, immediately throws a wrench in the works. He uses the example of trying to point to the now. The moment you try to grasp it, it's already gone.
Oh, I see. He's getting at how our immediate experience is constantly slipping through our fingers. We can't ever really pin it down.
Precisely, and this reveals a fundamental limitation of sense certainty. It's fleeting, incomplete, and ultimately can't provide us with a solid foundation for knowledge.
So we can't simply rely on our senses to understand the world. Where do we go from there?
From sense certainty, Hegel moves on to perception, where we try to grasp objects as distinct things with specific qualities. Think about how we categorize things. This is a chair. That is a table. This is a tree.
Right, we're trying to make sense of the world by putting things into neat little boxes.
But Hegel argues that even perception is more complex than it appears. He points out that our categories are often fluid and interconnected. Take, for example, a specific tree. What seems like a solid, separate object is actually constantly changing, growing, interacting with its environment.
So our perception of that tree is just a snapshot, a limited perspective on something much more dynamic and complex.
Exactly. And this leads us to the next step in the journey, force and the understanding. Here we start to realize that there are unseen forces shaping what we perceive.
Okay, so we're moving beyond the surface level of our senses and starting to think about the underlying mechanisms at play, kind of like realizing there's a whole engine under the hood of a car, not just the steering wheel.
A perfect analogy. We're beginning to grasp that there's more to reality than meets the eye, and we need a way to understand these hidden forces.
So this is where things start to get more philosophical.
Definitely. We're moving from simply observing the world to trying to understand the principles that govern it. And this leads us to one of the most crucial transitions in the phenomenology, the emergence of self-consciousness.
Right, things are getting interesting. This is where we become aware of ourselves as distinct from the world and other individuals.
Right. Exactly. But this awareness isn't something we're simply born with. Hegel argues that self-consciousness arises through a complex process of interaction, and particularly through conflict.
Conflict. Why conflict?
Because Hegel believes that we only truly become aware of ourselves as independent beings when we encounter another self-conscious being, and this encounter often takes the form of a struggle for recognition.
So it's like we need to see ourselves reflected in the eyes of another to fully understand who we are.
Precisely. And this brings us to one of the most famous and fascinating parts of the phenomenology, the master-slave dialectic.
Okay, I've heard about this. Isn't this where things get a little dramatic?
It does. Imagine this primal scene where two self-conscious beings clash, each vying for dominance. One emerges as the master, asserting their power over the other. Who becomes the slave?
It sounds like a straightforward power struggle. The strong dominate the weak.
Right. It seems that way. But Hegel throws in a brilliant twist. He argues that the master, in their dependence on the slave, actually becomes trapped in a limited form of self-consciousness.
Wait, what? How can the master be limited in their self-consciousness? They're the one in control.
That's the paradox. The master, by relying on the slave for recognition and labor, never fully develops their own sense of independence. They become dependent on the slave to maintain their sense of self.
So it's like the master is stuck in this loop, constantly needing external validation from the slave.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the slave, through their work and struggle, develops a deeper understanding of themselves and the world. They realize they have the power to shape reality through their actions.
Wow, so there's this hidden dynamic where the seemingly powerless slave actually gains a more profound self-awareness than the seemingly powerful master. That's mind-blowing.
It is. And this master-slave dialectic is more than just a historical anecdote. It's a metaphor for the complex interplay of power, recognition, and self-consciousness that plays out in all sorts of human relationships.
So it's not just about literal masters and slaves. We can see this dynamic in our own lives, in our relationships with friends, family, colleagues, even romantic partners.
Absolutely. Think about any situation where there's a struggle for dominance or recognition. Hegel's master-slave dialectic provides a framework for understanding how those power dynamics can shape our sense of self.
This has definitely given me a lot to think about. It's like looking at familiar relationships through a whole new lens.
That's the power of Hegel. He challenges us to see the world differently, to question our assumptions, and to recognize the hidden complexities in even the most seemingly simple interactions.
And this is just the beginning. We're still in the early stages of Hegel's journey of consciousness. Where do we go from here?
From the drama of the master-slave dialectic, we move into the realm of reason, where we try to grasp the world through logic, concepts, and systems. But, as we'll see, even reason has its limitations.
Okay, I'm ready to see where this journey takes us next. But I think we need a little break first to let all of this sink in. Join us in part 2 of our deep dive into Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit as we explore the world of reason and beyond.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. We've journeyed through the early stages of consciousness, from basic sensory awareness to the drama of the master-slave dialectic. Now we're entering the realm of reason, where things get even more intellectually stimulating.
All right, so we've left behind the raw emotions of self-consciousness. What does Hegel have in store for us in this world of reason?
Well, think about it this way. Up until now, consciousness has been struggling to understand itself and its relationship to the world. In the realm of reason, consciousness tries to take a step back and analyze the world in a more objective, systematic way. It's the age of science, logic, and the pursuit of universal laws.
So it's like we're trading in our emotional baggage for a lab coat and a microscope.
Exactly. We're trying to put the world under the microscope of reason, dissect it, categorize it, and figure out the underlying principles that make it tick. Think of the Enlightenment, the rise of scientific thinking, this drive to explain everything through rational principles.
That's a shift I can relate to. It's like when you finally learn the rules of a game, you can start playing it strategically instead of just reacting to what's happening.
That's a great way to put it. And Hegel shows how this quest for rational understanding can be incredibly powerful. It allows us to make sense of the world in a new way, to predict how things will behave, and even to manipulate them to our advantage.
So reason gives us a sense of mastery over the world.
Precisely. And this can be exhilarating. It's the feeling of cracking a code, of unlocking the secrets of nature. Think about the incredible advances in science and technology that have come about through this rational approach.
But I'm guessing there's a but coming here.
You know me too well. Hegel argues that this quest for rational mastery has a shadow side. As we become more focused on abstract concepts and systems, we can lose touch with the richness and immediacy of our lived experience.
Okay, so it's like we're trading in the vibrant colors of life for a black and white blueprint.
That's a great image. We start to see the world as a collection of objects and forces, rather than the messy, interconnected, and often beautiful reality that it is.
So reason can create a kind of distance between us and the world we're trying to understand.
Exactly. It's like dissecting a frog in biology class. You learn a lot about anatomy, but you also lose the living frog. And Hegel argues that this can lead to a sense of alienation, a feeling of being disconnected from ourselves and the world around us.
That makes sense. It's like when you get so caught up in analyzing a piece of music that you forget to actually enjoy listening to it.
Perfectly put. And Hegel takes this even further. He argues that reason, in its relentless pursuit of knowledge, eventually bumps up against its own limits.
What do you mean by limits?
Well, reason is all about finding universal laws, clear definitions, and logical consistency. But what happens when we encounter concepts that defy easy categorization or measurement? What happens when we run into paradoxes and contradictions that our logic can't resolve?
So it's like reason hits a wall, realizing it can't explain everything.
Exactly. Hegel uses the example of mathematics to illustrate this. Math seems like the epitome of rational thought, a system of perfect logic and precision. But even in math, we encounter concepts like infinity, which stretch the limits of our understanding.
Infinity. That's a head-scratcher, for sure. It's like trying to imagine a number that keeps going forever. It makes my brain hurt.
Mine too. And Hegel's point is that reason, in its quest for absolute certainty, can lead us to these dead ends, these places where our logic breaks down. It doesn't mean that reason is useless, but it does suggest that it's not the whole story.
So if reason isn't the answer, what is? Where do we go from here?
This is where things get really interesting. Hegel argues that the limits of reason push us towards a new stage of consciousness, the realm of spirit.
Spirit? That sounds pretty mystical. Are we talking about ghosts and seances now?
Not quite. For Hegel, spirit refers to the realm of culture, history, and social relationships. It's where individual consciousness expands beyond itself and recognizes itself as part of a larger whole.
Okay, so we're zooming out from the individual mind to the collective consciousness of society.
Exactly. And this stage is all about how we, as individuals, find meaning and purpose within these larger structures. It's about the ethical order, the rules and norms that govern society, the shared beliefs and values that shape our worldviews.
So it's like moving from me to we.
That's a great way to put it. And this transition isn't always smooth. Hegel shows how the realm of spirit is marked by tension and struggle. We grapple with the demands of the collective, with the expectations of our culture, with the weight of tradition. It's a constant process of negotiation between our individual desires and the needs of society.
It's like trying to find your place in the world, figuring out where you fit in, and how to balance your own needs with the needs of others.
Precisely. And this struggle is essential for growth. Hegel argues that through this process of negotiation and conflict, we develop a deeper understanding of our place in the world and our responsibility to others.
So it's not about blindly following the rules, but about engaging with them, questioning them, and ultimately shaping them.
Exactly. And this brings us to a fascinating concept that Hegel explores in this section: absolute freedom. He argues that as we become more aware of ourselves as part of this larger social and historical fabric, we also become more capable of shaping it, of enacting change.
So it's like a double-edged sword. More awareness, more freedom, but also more responsibility, more potential for things to go wrong.
Exactly. Hegel shows how this absolute freedom can be a source of both liberation and destruction. Think about revolutions, social movements, the power of collective action to both overturn oppressive systems and unleash chaos. It's a powerful idea, this notion that we're not just passive recipients of culture and history, but active participants in shaping it.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking, but I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed by all these complex ideas. Where does Hegel take us from here?
Well, from this dynamic and often tumultuous realm of spirit, Hegel leads us into the domain of religion, which attempts to reconcile individual consciousness with the absolute, with the ultimate source of meaning and purpose. But we'll have to save that exploration for the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm ready for a little mental breather. Join us in part 3 as we delve into the profound and fascinating world of religion in Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Welcome back to our deep dive into Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. We've covered a lot of ground, from the most basic forms of sensory awareness to the complex interplay of self-consciousness and the limits of reason. Now, we're entering what sounds like the most mysterious realm yet, religion.
It's definitely a fascinating stage in Hegel's journey of consciousness. Remember, we've been following this progression where consciousness is trying to understand itself and its relationship to the world. In religion, consciousness seeks to grasp the absolute, the ultimate source of meaning and purpose.
Okay, so we're talking about big questions here. What is the meaning of life? What's our place in the universe? Is there a higher power? Those kinds of things.
Exactly. And Hegel doesn't shy away from these questions. He sees religion as a natural stage in the development of consciousness, a way for us to grapple with the ultimate mysteries of existence.
But there are so many different religions out there, each with its own set of beliefs and practices. How does Hegel approach this diversity?
He's not trying to endorse any particular religion or say which one is right instead. He's interested in how the human impulse to connect with the transcendent, with something bigger than ourselves, manifests in different forms throughout history.
So it's like he's looking for the common thread that runs through all religions.
Precisely. He analyzes different forms of religion, starting with what he calls natural religion. This is where we see the divine reflected in nature, in the awe-inspiring power of a storm, or the intricate beauty of a flower.
That's something I think a lot of people can relate to, that sense of wonder and awe we feel in the natural world.
Absolutely. And Hegel sees this as an early stage in our religious understanding. But he argues that it's ultimately limited because it doesn't fully account for the complexities of human experience.
So we need a more nuanced understanding of the divine.
Right. And this leads to the next stage, the religion of art. Here, we try to capture the absolute through beauty and creativity. Think about the stunning cathedrals of the Middle Ages, the intricate sculptures of ancient Greece, the powerful music of Bach or Beethoven. These are all attempts to express something beyond words, to touch the divine through human creation.
I love that idea, that art can be a bridge to something transcendent.
It's a powerful concept, but Hegel sees even this form of religion as incomplete, because it's still bound by the limitations of human expression.
So we need something more.
Hegel believes that the most developed form of religion is revealed religion, which is where the divine reveals itself directly to humanity. This is most clearly seen in Christianity, where God takes human form in Jesus Christ.
So now we're getting into the realm of specific religious traditions.
Right, and again, Hegel isn't trying to argue for the superiority of Christianity or any other religion. He's interested in how this idea of divine revelation pushes our understanding of the absolute even further.
But even within Christianity, there are so many different interpretations and denominations. How does Hegel account for that?
He sees these differences as part of the ongoing dialectical process, this constant back and forth between different perspectives that we've been talking about. He believes that religion is always evolving, always being challenged and refined.
So it's not about finding one definitive answer,
Yeah.
but about this ongoing conversation, this wrestling with the big questions.
Exactly. And Hegel argues that ultimately, religion points us towards a higher form of consciousness that transcends faith and dogma, a form of knowing that he calls absolute knowing.
We've been talking about absolute knowing all episode.
Right.
But I have to admit, it still feels a bit mysterious. What does it actually mean to achieve this level of understanding?
That's the million-dollar question. And Hegel, in true philosophical fashion, doesn't give us a simple answer. He argues that absolute knowing isn't about possessing a complete set of facts or arriving at some final unchanging truth. It's not like suddenly having all the answers to life's mysteries.
So even at the highest level of consciousness, we don't have it all figured out. That's kind of humbling.
It is, instead. Absolutely. Knowing is about understanding the process of understanding itself. It's about recognizing the limitations of our own perspective, the historical and cultural forces that have shaped our thinking, and the ongoing dialectical process through which knowledge is constantly being challenged and refined. It's about seeing the big picture, how all the pieces fit together, and how our understanding is always evolving.
Okay, so it's more about the journey than the destination.
Precisely. And Hegel emphasizes that this journey isn't a solitary one. Absolute knowing emerges through our interactions with others, through the clash of ideas, through the collective effort to make sense of the world.
So it's like we're all in this together, each contributing to this grand project of understanding.
Exactly. And that's what makes this idea so powerful and, honestly, a bit humbling. It suggests that our individual understanding is always incomplete, always evolving, always in dialogue with the understanding of others.
That reminds me of that saying, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know.
That's a perfect way to put it. Hegel is suggesting that absolute knowing isn't something we achieve once and for all. It's this ongoing process of reflection, of engagement with the world, of dialogue with others, of constantly striving to grasp the totality of what is self.
So where does that leave us? What are we supposed to do with this idea of absolute knowing? Does Hegel give us any practical advice?
Well, he doesn't give us a step-by-step guide or a list of life hacks, but I think his message is ultimately one of empowerment. He's suggesting that by understanding how our minds work, by recognizing the forces that shape our thinking, by actively engaging in the process of knowledge creation, we become more free, more self-aware, more capable of shaping the world around us.
It's a call to action in a way, not to just accept the world as it is, but to understand it, to question it, to strive for something better.
Exactly. And that's what makes Hegel so relevant even today. He challenges us to think critically, to be aware of our own biases, to engage in meaningful dialogue with others, and to never stop questioning and learning.
It's definitely been a challenging but rewarding journey, exploring Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. What a mind-expanding book.
It truly is. And remember, this is just a taste of what Hegel has to offer. There's so much more to discover in his work.
Well, thanks for being our guide on this intellectual adventure. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you a new perspective on the power of ideas. Keep those minds churning.